Good afternoon, everyone. I'm not sure how many of you are tuned in for our live session, but I'm going to go ahead and just jump right in. If you can hear me fine, just say hello in the chat box and let me know that the mic is sounding okay. Because this is just an optional critique, we only have about 3, so it's not going to be a very long one. But if you do have questions about the upcoming week's content or anything like that, just let me know. So here, looking forward, before we jump into the critiques, I just wanted to mention that there's a new video under this week in your student portal, and it's on painting the second pass on the eyes. And then tonight I will have another video available on the nose and the lips. But remember, if you haven't started your second color pass, watch the large plane color pass and do that one first before you get into the features. And next week we will critique that second color pass. However, if you can only get the large planes second color pass finished in time for critique, that's fine. Don't feel like you have to rush, through the next couple of layers. I want you guys to take as much time as needed for that. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in. But again, like I said, if you have any questions, just post it in the chat box there. So I'm going to start with you, Brenda. And one of the things I was wondering about this is if the image feels a little bit warm. To me, it looks a little bit warm in color, so I'm going to play with the color balance just a little bit, and I'm thinking it's the photo. Hi, Penny. It's a small group today. You might be the only other one in here. I'm not sure. Because the critique was optional today, I think not too many people are tuning in here, which is fine. We can't always make every single session, right? Okay, so I try to take out some of the red here. Oh, okay, so there's 2 of us in here. All right, Tammy, welcome. Okay, so like I said, it's going to be a short critique. We just have three submissions. Tammy, did you send me anything? Or are you just tuning in? Because if you need me to open up something, just let me know. I checked my email before our session, but I just wanted to make sure. Okay, Brenda, so let's get back to your critique here. So one of the things I would like to suggest that you focus on in your second color pass is to lighten up some of the skin tones and maybe introduce a few more cool tones. I do see that you have, cool tones down here, which is good, but I do feel like it needs to be a little bit darker in order to soften this edge where it meets the hair. And then there's a couple of areas where the colors maybe get just a little hot and saturated. So my suggestion would be to start by brightening up a couple of the light planes, especially right around the highlights. So let's see, make sure I'm on a good brush here. So like for example here in the cheek, you can start to scumble and it'll push some of those colors back just a little bit. Let me make sure I'm doing that on another layer. So you can see she has like this highlight that kind of rides down the cheek through here. There's some smaller forms where you get these kind of cooler halftones where you could start to incorporate a couple of those transitions. It does feel a little dark down in the lower jaw, but you want to go maybe cooler as well. So you could start to scumble a little bit in these lower sections. And even this gray in here maybe is a little warm. You can see she has a little bit more of a neutral gray. And I feel like you have the color really close down here at the bottom, but maybe it just needs to carry up and just be a little bit more light and opaque. Same goes for some of these planes here. So you know, for the most part, your transitions look pretty good. I would just focus on brightening up and bringing a little bit more finesse to some of those colors, especially like down in here in the chin. It feels a little bit rough. And then over in the right side, I do feel like the transition from the shadow into that red can be helped by going a little bit deeper and cooler with the red here. So maybe going in with more of a red violet, something a little darker. And that might mean you have to do what I did in my painting, which is re-wet your shadow color right along that edge so that you can round it out and soften that transition. So you can see what kind of difference that makes in terms of some of the edge quality. I am feeling like there's a space issue here in the underneath the nose, between the nose and the mouth. And I think it's that the nose got a little bit too low. So my suggestion is going to be to bring a little bit of this light tone up a little higher. Maybe trim your cast shadow. And then what would be the easiest way to go about this is to just look at that clear shadow shape that she has here underneath the nose. And I would just move that up to about there. It's subtle, but if you don't worry too much about some of those details within that cast shadow and form shadow on the nose in the beginning. You can add a little bit more detail later, but I think then it would be a little easier to bring this up. And it's not that much space, but you can see that it has a pretty big impact. And I think it's mostly this left nostril that will need to be brought up just a little bit higher. To bring up that position of the side plane of the nose here. And even though she has a little bit of light creeping in here, just if you make it more of like a cool halftone instead of a real light tone, it's going to read like that underplane to the nose. So I would just work on bringing up that shape a little bit. Then you can go in with the darker kind of alizarin color after you've got the shadow shapes in place, and you can indicate a little bit of that darker nostril within that shadow shape. And you could even go in and bring in, you know, just a touch of reflected light where you see it, but it's easy to overdo that. So I would concentrate on getting that shape there. And then, you know, you can have the fill through them and all of that. Let's take a look and see how that feels. Compared to what it was here. Yeah, so it's shortened and made her nose just a little bit more close to her size. Might need to be a touch wider than what I did here. And I'm just leaving that a little bit more obvious so that you can see where that sits. although it's going to be much softer in the actual painting. But that height is going to allow for a little more room for that philtrum and the fullness of her upper lip. And I think you're going to probably want to drop that corner of this lip, and you might have raised it, you know, kind of adjusting for the nose. But I'm thinking it needs to come down a little bit and then leave this opening where it is. I'll draw that in just a little bit darker. And I think this one is fine where it is. Maybe it just needs to be just a touch wider where that connects. Where you have the bottom lip is good. I would just take this color here and bring that a little bit more straight across. She has a little dip there. It's actually, when you look at the picture enlarged, it's that there's a slight separation between the bottom lip and upper lip, and it makes it look like the lip dips down there. It's very subtle though, and it's easy to over exaggerate. Even in my painting, I was kind of playing with that adjustment a couple of times when I did the second pass on my color. Another thing I would like to suggest is that you go in and deepen this shadow on the upper lip. She has this very distinct kind of shadow mass on this underplane, and it even kind of skips over to that side. She has a little bit of light coming in, but it's not as bright. And it's not nearly as pink as maybe what you have. That upper lip is a little bit cooler. The more saturated colors kind of come in towards the shadowy kind of halftone. And then her upper lip has a little more light on it, so you might just scumble just a little bit more of a light pink. Maybe something close to that cheek color. And look for those lost edges. In the lip. But you can see how that alone has added a lot more contrast and depth to the lip shape overall. And then the bottom lip could use a little more of a strong cast shadow underneath. And don't forget some of these deeper halftones. You can start to indicate some of those, because that's really important to indicating this side plane. This whole side plane has more of this cool halftone. And it keeps that kind of consistency with the light source. She even has a little bit even a darker kind of double shadow happening there. And one thing that helps this lip fade into the muzzle is that little overlapping shadow shape. It's not quite as bright, or sorry, not quite as dark as that, but it does help to soften the edge right where that corner of the mouth is. Edges along wherever you have anything that's razor sharp, you want in that second layer, you want to either glaze or just tile in another secondary halftone. It'll take kind of rewetting maybe the hair and repainting that edge, but that's going to help that jawline recede a little bit. And then I think her bottom lip, when you go in and add that secondary color, try going in with maybe a cooler pink like a alizarin and white, and just start to build up some of the lighter forms, especially on this right side. We get more of a lost edge there. It's really kind of almost impossible to detect where that lip is. She doesn't have that clear, distinct line there, except for with the exception of the highlight. So just work on building up that form a little bit. and that secondary shadow form on the side plane of the lip. So that'll add a little bit more dimension to the mouth. You can have areas where the chroma picks up. That's perfectly fine because she does have those areas in the lips. But just make sure you're thinking about the lips as they sit as a whole with the muzzle and not just, as these isolated shapes. Whenever you have form edges, just remember that they need to be softer and have more of a gradual transition than, say, a cast shadow edge. So this is a cast shadow edge here. But even though this is a cast shadow edge, it should have some level of softness to it because our light source was a little bit further from the model. So it became a little more diffused. If the light source was really, really close, like a direct light bulb, right next to the model's face, then we would have much sharper, higher contrast edges in those cast shadows. So just knowing that this is a little bit further away, and that these are all form shadows, and even your cast shadows are going to have a subtle softness to them, it's going to help you kind of develop that into the next level. With the eyes, I would just concentrate on maybe softening like the lid, the inner rim. I don't have a real good close-up of the eye. And probably next week I'm going to have everyone send me like an overall shot of your painting and then a close-up of the face. Because when we get into detailing the features, it's going to be easier for me to critique if I have a nice close-up shot. And I'll try and get that video to everyone on how to photograph your work, because that's going to help a lot. But so I would also work on maybe brightening up and cooling off a little bit of the whites of the eyes. That's going to help them pop a little bit more. But when you get to these edges here, you'll notice that like the color of the lightest part of her lid here, the rim opening waterline of the lid, it's kind of like this light grayish color. It's kind of like, get an ink pen here. So it's like that. And then when we look at the whites of the eyes over here, they're like that. So they're not maybe as hot of a color, but also they're a little bit darker on this right side. So I think that would help, is to make this color here, which you have as that color, to bring it down in value. Add a little blue to that color. Where it gets really warm is kind of right in here, but you can see even compared to what you have, maybe it's a little bit too light and too red. So maybe take that same color that you have under here and just add a touch of blue to it and build some of that contrast in the eyes, and that will help a lot too. All right, so those are my suggestions. If you have any follow-up questions, just let me know, and I'll send these edits to you after the critique. All right, Penny, are you still in here? All right, so this looks really good. I think you have like the general tonality of her skin tones. What I'd like to see is maybe pushing some of the more subtle forms. So a good area, and maybe some of the chroma in a few areas. So for example, the chroma would be here in the lips. So I would work on maybe pushing that. And if it's feeling too similar to your skin tones, it could be the red that you're using. So you might try going more with like an alizarin base, adding alizarin to it, and push some of the contrast on that shadow side. And especially in that upper lip. I think you could go like a really deep, rich red for that upper lip color. A combination of colors I really like use, especially in these really dark areas, is a transparent iron or red oxide, or it's also called transparent earth red, I think, in Gamblin. And then mixed with alizarin crimson, but it's like mostly alizarin. And it really, really works nicely for those real deep darks that you want. And you can even then start to add white to it, and you'll get kind of these cool berry tones that will help the lips stand out. So I think building some of that contrast in the lips is going to help a lot. She does have that kind of paler pink right towards the edge. And maybe even pushing the chroma just a little bit over on this far cheek with some of those same colors that you have in the lips. Maybe just a little lighter. And even though she has this light that kind of creeps back in here, notice how it starts to kind of take on a cooler tone and it goes a little bit darker. So I would maybe just start to transition that a little bit less kind of a peach tone, and maybe aim more towards something that's a little cooler. And that way it helps it recede back. And just notice how soft that edge is where it rolls towards shadow. It kind of picks up some of that background color, that violet, right along that edge. And that's going to help push that cheekbone back a little bit. It might have gotten a little wide there. And it's hard for me to tell just because of the contrast in some of the areas are a little sunk in, but if not, if it feels hard to see, just go back in and redefine this area back there a little bit darker and make sure that this shape is somewhat flat. We have a very kind of direct angle there along that edge. So I think starting with the lips is probably a good point for bringing in that nice rich chromatic color. In another area, I can see you started to do it here, adding that kind of gray-green, but I think you need to go a little lighter with that color and continue the cool tone a little higher. Not necessarily going much darker higher up, but more just cooling it off and kind of transitioning that across there. Same thing on this far side of the forehead. It's going to start to pick up a little bit more of that background color, that kind of matted, muted purple. And the same thing as this forehead plane starts to change and disappear back into the hairline. And that's going to, again, emphasize that receding form. I think you could add maybe, there's a couple of areas where you could throw in a little more intensity to the lights in the nose to just pump that form a little bit more. One of them is like right in there. I'm going to grab one of your colors here instead. So maybe just beef that up a little bit there. And then if you're feeling like you have a bright color there, but it's just not popping enough, what could need to happen is that you need to add a deeper kind of pink tone on the far side of the nose and go just a little bit deeper. Maybe something along the lines of this, especially towards that tip of the nose. And that can help as well. One thing you'll notice is that she has this very cool kind of purple gray tone right in here. And I think you could just pull that down a little further into this area, and that's going to help separate the bridge of the nose a little bit. And she actually has a little more definition kind of where this comes up too. And I don't get it from my angle, but I definitely see it here. It's maybe a little cooler. And then I would encourage you, you'll see me do this in the nose video that I'll have ready for you tonight, but down towards the very tip of the nose, you can kind of see these little hints of where the chroma kind of picks up right next to the shadow. It becomes just a little bit more red. So you might just go along that shadow edge and just emphasize that little pickup of warmth. And that red tone is going to bring the nose forward. She even has a little bit of that really rich red-orange reflected light in here. The key is to keep it dark but chromatic. So that way it still feels like an underplane, but it that reflected light is maybe created by like a cad red mixed with a little maybe yellow ochre or something. That's what I used in mine, and even that was still too light, and I ended up, I think, throwing alizarin crimson in there to darken it. That could probably come down. Actually, I don't know if I want to lower that, but maybe the nostril opening needs to come up a little higher. Sorry, I keep zooming out so I can see the reference here. So yeah, it's a subtle shape in here, but maybe bringing that out a little more open and wide will help. She has that kind of orangey, it's not quite a shadow tone, but it kind of creates this extension of that nostril wing before this light kind of comes in and creeps in to that underplane. So these are just really small adjustments, but they're going to kind of add up and make a big difference. What I would suggest too is looking at ways you can soften the brows in that second pass, you know, light where you can make, you know, maybe the edges a little bit lighter. This one actually feels pretty good, except for right through here, maybe it needs to soften up a little bit. But over here along that underplane, sometimes just tiling in a half tone kind of around it and using that as like a blender edge, it can help the eyebrows feel a little bit more natural. With regards to the eye shape, there's just a few subtle differences I'd like you to kind of take a look at. Let me bring this photo reference in a little closer here. So you can see I think where you have this peaking here, it needs to be a little bit more over where the iris is. So I would open this up a little bit, and it'll help to soften kind of this angular peak that you have here in the corner. And then this can come down maybe just a little bit. And the same goes for this eye, though it's a little bit maybe more subtle. I think this part can come down. And what's hard to see is on this back side of the eye. What's happening is we're actually seeing a little bit of that underplane, and the more foreshortened the eye is from this angle, the more rounded this end cap is kind of going to be. So I would just round that out just a little bit and then bring this down, and that should help to correct some of the shape of the eye there. Oh, I just saw your question. The opposite. Oh, you know what? Yeah, you're right. Maybe just a touch. That other nostril, I would just maybe just bring it up a little higher. I think what can definitely happen though is that you can go darker with your shadow, a little darker and warmer, and it won't be as distinct. You won't be able to see in that nostril as much, though you can have some soft kind of definition of where the opening of the nostril is. Just a very soft, maybe dark shape within that. But I think, yeah, you should maybe build a little more contrast into that that right side. But going back to the eyes, I think that should give you a little bit more likeness. And then this bottom lid, I think, would help, would benefit from maybe building more contrast in the shadow underneath. And make it very soft. So you don't need to have it real, like a real hard line. Especially here, it starts to kind of fade off. It's essentially the bottom of the ball of the eyeball that we're seeing tucking into the socket. So it's a form and not necessarily a line, even though oftentimes our eyes perceive it as a line. Once you've adjusted those top lines for the eyes, go ahead and just bring this up a little bit higher and over, because we can actually see, like, here's her lash line, and we could see the arc above it. It doesn't quite go down and meet it. I think the right eye is good for the eyelid, but I think for this one, just bring that line up a little bit. And here we can see that underplane, and I think you already have that. It was just a matter of where you placed the peak. So it should be right above the pupil. And that should be good. I think her eye curves down a little bit more. Rounds out just from this angle. It's slightly different. Yeah, the eye adjustments will make a big difference. A lot of times it's really easy for eyes to get off when you're first doing the first color pass. But one thing to always remember is that whatever direction the eye is looking, you know, you have the iris here, the highest peak, especially if they're looking up, is going to be there. If they were looking in, here's the tear duct, same eye, the peak is going to be more in. You know, so it just, this peak is, it's because the way the eye is structured, it opens up towards the direction that we're looking. So let's just recap a couple of those differences here. So a lot of it is just tonal work, refining some of the midtones. I think mostly what you're going to be doing is going darker in some of the midtones rather than lighter, and cooler. So really introducing more cool tones and then pumping up that chroma in the lips, edge qualities, and then of course making some of those drawing corrections in the eyes. Do you have any questions? So I'll send you like 2 images. I'll send you one with just the drawing corrections for the eyes, and then I'll send you one with the paint over as well to give you an idea of how to move forward this week. You have some of these cool violets in here. So these colors here on your palette, and even this color, will work nicely in the skin tone. This color that you have on the neck, maybe just a shade or 2 darker, is what you should have right in this section of the jawline, transitioning up into that pink. I think that's a perfect color. So test it out and see if that works for you. All right, beautiful work. I look forward to seeing your painting next week. All right, Colin. Are you here, Colin? I know you said maybe you wouldn't be able to make it. Okay, so I'm going to just go ahead and jump in. I think you have a really nice start here. You have a good solid likeness. There's a few things. I think a lot of it has to do with adding a little more tone and chroma to certain areas. Bring up a layer here. One of the things that stands out to me too is this line right here, how this kind of dips in. It's a little bit harsh, and she has a subtle dip there, but it's more like that rather than, you know, such a sharp angle. So I would work on maybe just straightening that out just a little bit. You can, like I said, you can have it dip in just a little, but maybe straighten that out a touch. One of the things that's changing kind of her likeness just a touch, I think the hairline feels just a tad too low. I think it would help to bring maybe that a little bit wider. And maybe it's that the top of the head got a little bit tall. So it's kind of, you know, we have all this foreshortening through the face here, but when you get to the top of the head, it should be more foreshortened, and we don't quite see that. So I'm thinking somewhere around there. It's about as wide as what you have. I think it just needs to be shorter at the top. So that will help as well. Otherwise, I think just going through, you have some of the right colors in here, but you want to work on creating maybe some more gradual and soft transitions. So maybe even pushing this a little bit deeper. Especially you can see down in here, it picks up that real nice strong kind of gray as it gradates down. And one way you can emphasize, so something more like that, one way you can emphasize this little overlap form that you're seeing here where you created that dip is just to carry a little bit of a halftone in just a little bit. It's easy to over exaggerate, so just do it subtly, but that can help to create a little bit more of that sculptural quality. I do think you can beef up some of the color intensity in a few areas in the cheek, and maybe carry a little more pink and spot it around in this section of her cheeks. There are highlights there, but it's kind of broken up with these smaller forms of red where the capillaries kind of come to the surface, and then maybe your highlights can start to take on a little bit of pink through this area to emphasize that warmth. You're starting to get some of those nice cool kind of lavenders through the eye here, but I would just continue to push that. This color also picks up kind of a richness. I think the line needs to come out to the left a little bit more, and then you'll take some of this color and push it out a little bit wider. It doesn't quite connect to the nose. As you can see, there's a small kind of gap there. And just like you push some of the values down here, start to push some of the values where it transitions into the chin, so it doesn't have as hard of a line. This is a form edge, so it's going to have a little more softness. I think you could also beef up some of the intensity of the red here. Go darker, kind of more of a berry color, right next to that shadow. And you might find yourself having to re-wet that shadow as well, just to be able to blend that edge a little further. And it goes a little cooler here. You might be a little bright in that section, right through this area here. It shouldn't be nearly as light as what's happening over here. So you might find yourself needing to maybe go a little bit more gray or dull in that area and just soften out. Especially as it comes down here into the mouth area, you're going to have more of those half tones, those cool half tones. And that's going to just really keep pushing the richness to the form. A good area to look at, for example, would be this area, and then you compare it to here, and we have more of a gray because that plane is moving away, and it's going to help you transition that shadow into the form of the mouth right in here. It's a tight space, so there's a lot kind of going on. And make sure your cast shadow doesn't get too long there. It should be about there. I think you had it coming down there, so you can shorten that up a little bit. One thing that'll help too is to don't be afraid to push that dark in the lips next. And it could be that you have it that dark. Maybe it just got sunk in. It's a little hard to tell. She has a very rich kind of alizarin color for the dark here, and that beefing up that chroma is definitely going to add the illusion of more color to her lips. And then just before you have the opening of the mouth, take a little bit of a deeper red, pink, and maybe something like maybe something like that, and just tile it in a little bit. That might be too dark. Right along that edge, so you get that rich chroma just before the lip gets lighter, and it really helps to create that volume to the bottom lip. You'll see me talk about this in my video where there's this pickup of chroma, and I can see you're starting to get it there, this kind of red-orange, but you might indicate that and then go darker with your cast shadow underneath, just in that spot right underneath, and that's going to create that pop for that value there. And she has a little more, maybe of a deeper value on this right white of the eye here. So don't be afraid to push that a little bit darker, especially because it kind of creeps back and falls into this cast shadow from her eyelashes. It adds a nice kind of mystery, and you can add a little more dark to the tops of her eyes. Helps that kind of disappear into that pupil, and it creates a little more illusion of that kind of shimmer that we get in the irises of the eye. Okay, so those are my suggestions. Also, another thing is it's important to finish out these areas and get anything that is the underpainting color colored in with even if it's just a real loose base tone that you just scumbled over it quickly, because this color is influencing your perception of the skin tone. So before you do any of the secondary layer, make sure you finish blocking out some of these areas, that you have no underpainting showing anymore, because like I said, it will influence how you perceive your skin tones kind of moving forward. All right, good job, and let me know if you have any follow-up questions. All right, this was a very short critique, everyone. Thank you for tuning in, those of you who were able to make it. Does anyone have any questions about the upcoming week or next week's critique or anything in general? All right, guys. Well, if nobody has any questions, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. And if you guys think of anything, feel free to reach out to me. And so next week, just try to get through that second layer, but don't rush. If you can't get to the features for a second pass, that's okay. I mentioned this in this morning's critique. Okay, Tammy, so you're asking where should we be by next week? Good. So by next week, so this week's videos show you how to do the second color pass over all of the large planes and then the eyes, and then tonight I'll have another one up for the lips and the nose. And so once you've watched, you know, each section, you're welcome to move forward on your painting, but don't feel like you need to do it all by next week. If you can only get the large planes done with that second color pass, then just do that. If you can get to doing the second refinement on the features, then you could do that too. Of course, you'll be implementing some of the changes I indicated here, so just try to get it as far as you can. Kind of moving forward in the course, these were the weeks that were so heavy in terms of workload, and that's why I gave everyone just a little extra time in this extra critique, because I realize it's a lot of work to be done in such a short period of time. So moving forward in the class, there isn't going to be nearly as much work to be done each week. You know, I'm going to be going through and just refining this and that. You know, this week was a bit of work to refine the features. I think when I refined the eyes, it was a 2-hour video, and then when I did the nose and lips, it was another 2-hour approximately. So it takes some time. But kind of leading into the end of the class, what we'll be doing is refining the hair, the background, and putting in small details on the features. So really, if you find yourself a little bit behind, it's okay. Don't rush it. Kind of hear forward. Just take each lesson and just keep pushing forward as you can. At the very end, I'm going to have a video on how to varnish and kind of put professional presentation on your paintings. And also I'm going to do one where I change the background a little bit in my painting to put her in a little bit more of like an ambiguous setting or something like that. So I'll talk a little bit about how to implement changes if you want to. But that's completely optional. You guys can just leave your background color the color it is. So that's pretty much where we're at. The bulk of the work is behind us, but start working on your second color pass. In the third one, we will be doing like eyelashes and really tiny highlights and, you know, finessing reflected lights and that sort of thing, and hair. You know, some of the more kind of like the icing on the cake. But this is the real important part, the foundation. So take your time with this. Does that make sense? So just kind of start on your second layer, but don't rush yourself. And yeah, and I'm going to try and get that video up for how to photograph your work with accurate color. So I had a family emergency, so we didn't get to film that this week, but I'll try and get to that in this coming week. That way you guys can, and I'm going to show you how to do it like with a regular camera, like a DSLR, and then how to do it with your phone even, and experiment with different lighting around your house or around your studio until you get the right lighting. And so I'll have a couple of tips on that too. Yeah, I decided, I've been kind of on the fence on whether or not I was going to change the background in the painting, but I think what I'm going to do is kind of what I like to do in my personal work which is introduce like a little bit of a stormy sky, and it'll be kind of an ambiguous landscape in the background. but it'll be kind of a good way to show how you move away from the photograph. Thank you, Tammy. He's recovering. Yeah, it was just a little bit of a hectic week. It totally derailed the whole week. I had 2 shows opening this week, and I almost nearly forgot about those. I mean, they're in other states, so and other areas. I can't really attend live, but I almost forgot to send out my newsletters about announcing the shows. It's been a little bit of a crazy week, so hopefully next week will be smooth sailing. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. All right, guys, thank you for tuning in. And if you have any questions, you know how to reach me in the forum. And I look forward to seeing your work next week. All right, bye, guys. Have a nice weekend.